What happens when Jesus heads into Jerusalem? That's what we're going to find out today in Matthew 21. Hi, everyone. This is Jill from the North Woods. Boy, we are about to hit some tough chapters. Here we are. Jesus headed towards Jerusalem. This means impactful things are going to happen in his ministry. Everything that everyone has been trying to get him to stop doing. No, we're not going to let the Romans take you. No, we're not going to let you die. No, all these things, it's going to start happening right now. And so this is going to be the beginning of the end of his ministry. I know from the podcast, this is hard chapters. He starts off in Bephagy, which is on the Mount of Olives, across from the Kidron Valley. So there's Jerusalem, this deep valley, then the Mount of Olives, and Bephagy. So he is over on the other side of this. My friends were hikers when I was in Jerusalem, just people that I met on the archaeology dig. And one of them was quite religious, and she wanted to walk this Bephagy, Bethany, into Jerusalem on the backside of things. And so I went and did it because I love hiking. And I wasn't a Christian at the time. I didn't understand what I was seeing. I wish I had paid more attention, but I got to see the olive grove, which on my podcast I called the Olive Garden, which I shouldn't call it the Olive Garden. But I got to see the Church of All Nations that was over there. And it was a good size hike. Now, looking back at it, I was like, wow, she wanted to walk in the footsteps of Jesus going into Jerusalem. And so that's what I got a chance to do, even though I didn't know it. So Jesus says to them, go and bring a donkey. There's a donkey over there. He's tied up. Bring it to me. And if anyone stops you, says, hey, the Lord needs this. And they'll let you have it. So they went over there. They found the donkey. And exactly like he said was going to happen, happened. The guy's like, okay, he can have the donkey. And this fulfills a prophecy. Remember, again, Matthew is checking off boxes of prophecy from Zechariah 9:9 that says, daughters of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, a foal of a beast of burden. These are working at him. This is not a majestic horse. The Romans would have gone in through a better gate. They would have been on chariots and horses and what they call litters, which is where soldiers were holding this up. They would have been fancy. This is a man with a working animal coming in to a humble gate. So there's some questions. Was it a donkey that was a colt? Was it two donkeys, a mom and a colt? And the general idea they thought for this, I tried to figure out what exactly was happening, is that chances are they were bringing the colt, but because it was a donkey that had never been ridden before because it was young, they bring the mom donkey along so the colt is comforted. So it was two donkeys probably, and your mom's there to make things better. So they bring it and they put the cloaks on the donkey and Jesus sits on it, and then the crowd goes ahead of them, throwing their own cloaks onto the ground, including palm branches. Yep, this is Palm Sunday. If you're a Christian, you go to church, people have palm boughs, they are given palm crosses. This is to remember Palm Sunday. So they spread these out on the ground, and the crowd is shouting, Hosanna, Son of David, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna means save us, like a scream, save us. And so they're begging Jesus to save them. It makes me think of the passages that goes and talks about making way, this path straight for the king. They're going to put their cloaks down and these palm branches down to make the path gentle for Jesus on this donkey. It's not going to be easy once he gets into the city. The whole city is stirred up. And again, this is Passover time. So people go into Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. So if there's a population of Jerusalem, now there's going to be 1 million more people in Jerusalem for pilgrimage at Passover time to go into the city. So this is going to be a hot point. The Romans are going to be worried. The temple structure is going to be worried. What if the people get upset? What if we cause an uproar? And so we've been hearing, and they remember all of the stories they've been probably hearing about the prophet Jesus of Nazareth, the people who are going out seeing John the Baptist, seeing Jesus, following him around everywhere, and now Jesus is coming into the temple area. He goes into that temple area where they sell animals so that they can be sacrificed to the temple. You're supposed to bring an animal sacrifice. If you were rich, you brought a lamb, and it had to be spotless. And if you were poor, you brought doves. And what Herod did is that he had this court of the Gentiles. So these people who were selling these animals might not even be Jewish, but it's before you get into the temple area. So you could sell things so that you can get your sacrifice, because traveling with animals is very hard. And all these people needed sacrifice at the temple. And so they sold it. But what was happening is they were selling it for way too much money. They were making a thievery of this. And the temple was getting a kickback from all of this. And so this is where Jesus now sees these in this area. The money changers are there. So if I came from Syria, or if I came from way out east in Arabia, I could change my money into the money in Jerusalem so that I can buy one of these animal sacrifices. And that's the money changers. And so he says, you know what? My house will be called a house of prayer, but you make it a den of robbers. That's from Isaiah 56:7. He's telling them, you're taking something beautiful like the temple and you're turning it into something gaudy and trashy. You're ripping people off. You're stealing from people. Maybe the money changers too were turning big coins into smaller denominations so they could buy a dove for 2 cents or 2 small coins. This is the life that they were making for themselves. And the people were trying to do an honest thing by giving sacrifice. You've turned this into Disney World. You've turned this into an obnoxious market when it's supposed to be about the worship of God. My Father, that's what Jesus is talking about. So he overturns the tables and he uses his, like as a whipping, to get them to go out of there. Get out of my Father's temple. And so then some men come up to him and ask Jesus to heal them from their blindness. Of course, Jesus heals them. And the chief priests and the scribes saw what Jesus was doing. Now Jesus came to them. And the children were crying out, Hosanna, Son of David, save us, Hosanna. And now they're mad. Chief priests and the scribes and the temple structure leadership. And they were indignant. Do you hear what they're saying? Do you hear what they're calling you? And Jesus says, haven't you ever read, out of the mouth of infants and nursing babes, you have prepared praise? I mean, even the smallest children get it. They don't understand the complexities, but they understand God. They understand faith in God. They get that particular piece. My pastor this morning was talking about a little girl who had to get stitches on her hands, and she sang the whole time, I am Jesus' little lamb. And whenever she would get scared, she would sing. And the nurse was amazed at how much faith this little kid had. They get it. You don't get it. You learned people, you're not getting it, but they're praising me. So he goes out and goes back towards Bethany instead of Bephagy, and lodges there for the night. And so in the morning, it says that he was hungry and he sees a fig tree. And fig trees are big there. So there's different kinds of figs that produce it at different times. So he walks up to the fig tree and says, may no fruit come from you ever again. We will never have fruit again. So what is this lesson of the fig tree? We're going to hear this story in other gospels as well. And some people suggest it was false advertising, that the fig had blossoms. It was fruiting at this particular time, but this tree didn't have any figs on it. And so it was a analogy to Israel, to the temple structure. You look the part. You look like you are people who are going to produce fruit, but you're not. You're not going to produce fruit. And just like this fig tree, may you never produce fruit again. And so then he tells his disciples, he says, you know what? If you have faith and you don't doubt, you can do what I just did to this fig tree. You can say to the mountain, get up and throw yourself into the sea. And whatever you ask in prayer, if you do it in faith, you can receive it. Now, people tend to believe that it means you can do anything, but that is within God's will. If you have faith in God's will, you will be able to do miraculous things. The mountain that Jerusalem is on, this mountain is no longer producing fruit, and it should just get thrown into the sea. He knows that God the Father would give us these things. He gave the example that if your child asked for a fish, would you give him a serpent? If he asked for bread, would you give him stones? God knows what is best for us. He knows what is supposed to happen best for us. And so in this particular case, it's not just if you ask for anything in God's name, it's anything within God's will you can ask for him, and it will be given to you. Because if your faith is aligned with God, then you will ask for the thing that God would ask for you. Reminds me of that old country song where it said that he thanked God for unanswered prayers. Sometimes we ask God for things that we shouldn't have, that would be harmful to us. And so that's part of the miracle there too. And so this fig tree that we're going to see mentioned many times coming up in other gospels and in other stories, good trees produce good fruit. Good mountains produce good fruit. When you are a bad mountain and when you're a bad fig tree, you might look the part. You might look really good, but in essence, you're not good because you're not producing fruit. It's not just about us living a Christian life and hoping that we're doing a good enough job, go to church on Sunday, put money in the tithing area. What kind of fruit are you producing? It's more than that. We saw it again, too, when John the Baptist said that the axe is at the root of the tree because the tree is not producing fruit. Again, we're talking about Israel. We're talking about Jerusalem and the temple structure. That's what's not producing good fruit. Whew. So then Jesus crossed back from Bethany into Jerusalem, into the temple area, and the chief priests and the elders come up to him and it says, whose authority are you doing all this? Who told you could do this? Who's behind you? Who's backing you? They fundamentally believed that he was working for the devil. There's an interesting piece where Jesus is mentioned in Jewish writings, and it talked about Jesus being from the devil, that he was blaspheming. There's a wanted poster for him, and that's what they thought of him. They thought he was doing the work of the devil by doing all these things and claiming all these things. And he goes, you know what? Let me ask you this. The baptism of John, was that from heaven or was that from man? Was he just doing some made-up ritual or was he serving God? And they were afraid to answer. And the reason that they were afraid to answer is the audience, the crowd, is all right there. And they believed in John. John was very popular. People went out into the countryside to get baptized by John, to listen to John. And now they were so afraid that if they said, well, John was just a dude and he did not have the backing of God, people would get very upset. And so now they were worried about what the crowd thought of them. There was a lot of followers there. Again, this is Passover, so everyone's going to come into the city. Is it that he's Elijah? Is he announcing the Messiah? Is he serving God or is he serving himself? So now the temple structure is playing politics. They don't want to answer because they're afraid of the crowd. They want to say the popular thing. Well, we won't say. We're not going to answer your questions. I'm not going to tell you who I do these things by either. He knows they're cowards. He knows that they're playing politics, that they're trying to please people. So then he gives a story of a parable of two sons. A man owns a vineyard, and he tells his two sons, hey, go work in my vineyard. And the first son says, no, I'm not going to do that. And then later he changes his mind and he goes and works in the vineyard anyway. The other son says, well, of course I will. Of course I'll go, sir, and work in your farm. And then he doesn't do it. Which of these two sons did the will of his father? Ooh, well, you see now, this is going to be an analogy because you have this temple structure, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, all of them, who say they're doing the will of God, that they're following God's law, and they're not. They're not doing the will of God. But yet now we have this crowd following Jesus, tax collectors, prostitutes, the Gentiles, this ragtag group of apostles. And they weren't going to follow God, but now they are. And they are doing the will of God. And then he says again, the first will be last and the last shall be first. He's going to go on and talk about this. You say you're going to do God's will. You're not doing God's will. But these tax collectors, these prostitutes, these people that he's been preaching to, this shabby group of fishermen, all of them, they are doing the will of God, even though they weren't initially doing the will of God. But you who were going to do it, you didn't do it. You're not living in a godly way. You're not following God's law. But these guys, they're doing it. These people that you call scum. they're doing God's will. Then he gives them another parable that says that there was a guy who planted a vineyard, put a big fence around it, and dug out a wine press. We had a wine press in Ashkelon too. It's just this big place where you'd put the grapes and then you would crush them to produce wine. And it's kind of cool looking, and it's pretty big. And there were lots of vases and things to put wine in around this wine press. So he says, you know what? Go work this land and sell the proceeds. While I'm gone, the man who owns the vineyard, I'm going to go for a while. And while I'm gone, you work on this farm. And so then the tenants took the man's servants, who was gone now, and beat them. Killed another, stoned another. Then the landowner sent the other servants, and they did the same thing to him too. The tenants were renting the land and not respecting. Now the man says, well, I'm going to send my son. They know how precious my son is to me. And when the tenants saw the son, they said, this is the heir. Let's kill him. Have his inheritance. And so they took him and they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. And so then he asks the question, when the owner of the vineyard comes back, what's he going to do with these tenants who killed his son? So in the end, these people were supposed to work the land. They didn't want to. They rented it out. They could live off the proceeds. They weren't working the land. They killed his servants. They killed everyone he sent, which is going to represent the prophets, right? All the prophets that God sent to the people of Israel who were murdered when they told them the hard truth. And now he's going to send his son, and they kill the son too, which is about to be what happens to Jesus. This was a deep parable, and they would have understood what he meant by this parable, the scribes and the elders. He is telling them, he is convicting them of the sin that they did with the prophets of old. He is convicting them of the sin that they're about to do for the Son who is sent to these people to save them. And yet, instead, they're going to throw him out and kill him. And the parable finishes that says that the vineyard owner is going to kill those horrible tenants and actually rent the land out to people who want to work the land, who's going to produce the wine and do the will of God. So then he says, have you seen Psalm 118 that says that the stone that the builders rejected will become the cornerstone? The cornerstone is the part that holds up the whole building. You all rejected this stone, but instead it's going to be the cornerstone of everything. And you're rejecting me, and I'm going to be the cornerstone. I'm the central piece of this structure. And then that the kingdom of heaven is going to be taken away from you and given to someone who will produce fruit, who does the things I say. Those who fall on this stone, who trip over the stone, who the stone is a tripping point to them, it'll crush him. You're going to be destroyed by this very stone that you reject, meaning Jesus. This analogy would have meant something to him again because Herod was rebuilding the temple. He had been rebuilding it for a very long time. He built so many structures, not just the temple structure. In fact, I was staying right by the arch. I touched an arch that Herod built. His building is still there. They would have understood this stone analogy, that they are tripping on this stone, that they rejected the stone, and yet the stone became everything. And so they understood all of this, and then this is going to crush them. And then the Pharisees are like, well, wait a minute, are you talking about us? Yes, he is talking about you. They were still afraid of the crowd. Remember, they were afraid when they were asked the question about John. They're so mad they want to arrest him. They see the crowd. Again, all those people that are in Jerusalem for Passover, and they're afraid of the crowd because a lot of people thought of Jesus as a prophet. And that ends Matthew 21. Boy, that is a big, long chapter. So what I'm going to meditate on this week is the fact that the Pharisees were trying to hedge their bet. They were trying to make Jesus look bad without making the crowd mad. They were playing this sort of politic line. And it's not even bad enough that they were hating Jesus, that they wanted to destroy Jesus. But the fact is that they were trying to pretend that they weren't. How many times do we pretend to be one thing or say one thing because we don't want to get in trouble? We don't want to say the wrong thing. We're playing politics because we're trying to follow some sort of fine line. And my prayer this week is that I always recognize good fruit in people, that I always recognize good fruit in myself, that I try to do God's will and be one of those fig trees that produces good fruit, who does the thing that God says. I'm one of those tenants that will do the purpose of the vineyard instead of a tenant who doesn't do what they're supposed to do. And what I'm going to share with others is the fact that the kingdom of heaven is not about having pretty leaves or showy trees or a perfect vineyard. It's about doing the will of God. It is about doing what God asks us to do, producing good fruits, not because it's what our salvation is based on. Salvation is based on what Jesus does, but we still can produce good fruits. We're still asked to produce good fruits, and we don't want to be that fig tree with the axe at the chopping block. We want to be workers in the kingdom of heaven doing the right thing. All right, everyone, thanks so much. I appreciate you watching this video. Please remember that you can download the Ramps Bible Study. It is on my website, thebibleinsmallsteps.com. It's on red on the right side of it. I'm trying to figure out how to make the font bigger. And remember that you can always email me at jill@startwithsmallsteps.com. I'd love to hear from you if you have questions or comments, or if you think I got something right, or if you think I got something wrong. You can put comments in the chat channel too. I would love to hear from you. I want to have an active discussion going on about the Bible. Thanks so much for listening and have a great day.